I think it might have been even late last night. Now, this story, Brett McMurphy, not surprised by this. Oklahoma and Oklahoma State started playing back in 1914. They have played 108 times. They're going to play at least 109, maybe 10 or 11. We don't know. Who knows? They almost played twice last year, just shy of playing a repeat game for the Big 12 title. But Bedlam series between Oklahoma and Oklahoma State is done when Oklahoma joins the SEC. AD's told Action Network headquarters Bedlam series is latest iconic rivalry destroyed by conference realignment. Which of all of the rivalries that do you remember? You hear about A&M in Texas, Oklahoma and Nebraska, and they played last year and they played last weekend. Kansas, Missouri, I'm talking long term. Which of the rivalries, which is the one we've lost? All of them I hate that have ended. Which is the one that you think has been the most painful?
Well, the one that's the most talked about in our neck of the woods has been A&M in Texas, and that one's coming back, so we don't even really mention it. But it has for this state. I mean, it was a Thanksgiving Day or the day after for almost 100 years that rivalry was there, and it was a great rivalry at times, but it was mostly lopsided until about 1984. So,
as is Oklahoma and Oklahoma State.
Yeah, so
they're like 80 wins, 21 losses for Oklahoma. A lot of them are all lopsided.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, like sometimes, and it stinks that you don't have those rivalries, but not all of them have been that neck and neck, as people think. Most of it's kind of nostalgia for nostalgia's sake, but it does suck. It does suck that their interstate rivalries don't get to be played.
I mean, I guess Texas and Texas A&M, I guess. I mean, that's the one that we've been without for the longest, and you can't really say Bedlam now because it's not over yet. So, I mean, I don't think if you were born past, 1985, I don't think you care about Nebraska, Oklahoma. I mean, that's one that we romanticize about, the greatest game ever played. And it's like, yeah, well, when was that? It was in the 1970s. So, how relevant is that really to what we're talking about? So I think that's, old school romanticizing. And, I mean, did it really register beyond Nebraska and Oklahoma's older fans that this past weekend?
It didn't even register with me.
Yeah,
and I'm an older fan.
I know how great it was, but that was a long time ago at this point.
Well, they had the win that Oklahoma 22 years ago, 2020 maybe they played for a Big Ten title in 2008 or whatever it was, or 2010. But the last time they played with a lot on the line, would have been 2001. When Crouch caught the flea flicker, and the year before Oklahoma beat them on their way to winning the national title. That's been 20 years.
Yeah, 20 years. There's been some moments, but Texas basically maneuvered their way into being the top rival of Oklahoma a long time ago.
Yeah, and part of that was even before the Big 12 did it, but the Big 12, even when they were in conference, kind of castrated that rivalry by having this stupid scheduling format that took out one of your best TV games. So, that one... The Big 12 kind of did.
The Big 12 killed Oklahoma and Nebraska as a rivalry.
Yeah, they did kind of the
for
heavy
the sake
lifting
of OU Texas, basically. Yeah,
they did the heavy lifting beforehand.
They didn't have to, though. They could have done what the SEC has done and other conferences have done to keep specific rivalries intact, even if it would have been one-sided one way or the other initially.
And so now we end up in the Big 12 that we're in, where all those seeds of doubt and all those bad feelings were sown a long time ago in the very beginning days of this conference. It's almost like it was doomed to begin with, right? And now none of those teams are going to be in this conference now. None of those teams that were involved in that. So I think Nebraska-Oklahoma is a great historical rivalry. I don't know how much we'll miss it, though. I guess A&M and Texas, and I wondered to what extent that's been really just romanticized by the fact that I live here, and every November it's tradition to talk about it. But it's from an A&M and Texas perspective, and I don't know outside of that how many people really care about that game.
Only because it was one of the games always on Thanksgiving Day.
I get. I'm not knocking the tradition or anything. I'm just saying that, outside of those fan bases, I don't know how many people cared about it.
Dolfo on the check, Greg. Most people outside of Texas don't care much about A&M and Texas.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. And just to tell you, it didn't even occur to me until I was older how lopsided it was because, again, things that happened 25 years before you're alive.
Most of those series are.
But I have a memory very specifically in 88 or 89, my dad and I went to a game at DKR where A&M beat Texas. And it was the fourth or fifth year in a row they'd done it. And driving back, he is an A&M student in the 60s, couldn't have even imagine beating them one time in a row.
Yeah.
That's how lopsided it was. So, it's 100 years, but the first 70 of it, like A&M would win 1 or 2 in a row, and they would have a parade.
Texas, Arkansas. Texas, 56 wins to 23. Oklahoma has like 80 wins compared to Oklahoma State's 21 or so, and a few ties in between. Most of the rivalries are very one-sided. Oklahoma and Nebraska, I think now, it got to be pretty tight, but that one's now, of course, leaning towards the Sooners.
So, I mean, the whole point of talking about this was to go to Bedlam, and that one will be, that'll be something that I'm sure the fans in Oklahoma will be, sorely missed for both sides there. Maybe Oklahoma State more than Oklahoma. They can correct me in the chat if they want to. I don't sense a real love loss from the Oklahoma side of things, because every response that I've seen to any sort of debate about this has, been a chant of SEC or whatever, which I get that they're going to be playing new teams in new locations, and so they don't feel the need to have to play little brother or whatever, how they want to refer to it. But for Oklahoma State fans, I'm sure there's probably kind of like, the Texas schools where, yeah, you'd like to play Texas still. You'd have liked to have played A&M over the last few years, but ultimately you're not going to cry over spilt milk either, and you got to go about your business. And I'm sure Oklahoma State will do the same thing, and I'm sure, much like A&M and Texas, maybe not, meeting up again one day when they're both in the same conference, but I'm sure that Bedlam will renew at some point. There's no doubt just how long it takes to get there. Hopefully the Oklahoman writers aren't having to, for 20 years, write an annual Thanksgiving piece about the game that we lost. And, that tradition, hopefully it doesn't take that long to reignite it, but it still sucks.
Yeah. UT leads that series with A&M 76, 37, and 5. Double the wins. Again, there's another one that's 118. There'll be 119. Most likely no sooner, maybe in a year or two, but 2025.
Okay, another thing's going to happen. So Oklahoma is 90, 19, and 7 in Bedlam. So another thing's going to happen, and I'll use an example here in Waco because that's where we are. So there were a lot of people, even when the Big 12 was saved here, up in arms because A&M and Nebraska had left the conference, and particularly mad at A&M. Now, in my lifetime, my personal lifetime, Baylor has beaten A&M and tied them once. So over that point, which was, 10 or 11 years ago, in 31 or 2 years of my life, A&M had 27 or 8 wins in the series of that. And then after A&M left the conference, guess what happened? Baylor won it. So teams that are like Nebraska and A&M were gone, teams that they never beat, and then all of a sudden, guess what you can do? You can win the league more. Baylor won it 3 times after that happened. So you can lament the loss of rivalries, but if those rivalries have been punching you in the nuts the whole time, then maybe it's not such a bad thing.
Would have made it even more sweet, though, if you could have punched them in the nuts and win the Big 12 title along the way. Well, a couple of you have put up Michigan, Ohio State. That's not even a part of the conversation. That's an incredible long. That'll never end. Of course, we never thought some other ones would end. We're discussing rivalries that ended, that were long-term, that were really, really good, bitter or not, one-sided or not, but they are now out the window. And the reason we brought it up, as Craig went back and rewind, is that Oklahoma State appears as if they won't play anytime soon, whenever that is that Oklahoma leaves the Big 12. Chris, losing rivalries and regional partners is bad for fans and bad for football. Bedlam is just the latest rivalry to suffer from business decisions.
I don't know, man. That Michigan State-Washington, that was rivalry, just Big Ten, new Big Ten rivalry all over it. No, I mean, all seriousness, that's basically what we're going to get now. We'll remain to be seen on whether Washington's a Big Ten team in the near future or not. It sure seems like that feels like that's going to happen, but we got a little taste of it there, with that game this past weekend. And I don't know how, I know Washington enjoyed it being at home. I'm not sure how much Michigan enjoyed it, but that's going to go from a non-con type of game to similar to a conference game, if not a full-blown conference game. And so there will be, new rivalries created, I'm sure. But, yeah, the geography part of that and just the history part of that, whether it was lopsided or not, I think is, certainly a tough pill to swallow for a lot of fans who love the history of college football. College football leaders have basically, said that they don't care too much about history outside of Ohio State, Michigan, and Oklahoma, Texas, and the biggest games with the most eyeballs. And, business-wise, you can't really argue against that. But tradition-wise, certainly it's not great for just your typical college football fan, but that's the direction that it's headed. And for those that don't like it, if they stop watching enough in enough numbers, then maybe that causes those in charge to eventually have to, pivot a little bit. But until they see a reason to, they're not going to.
John Baptist, he goes, I disagree. I never lived in Texas or don't live in Texas. I love that Texas and A&M game. I think there's also some, I guess, around the holidays, Thanksgiving, that was a game. You had the OU-Nebraska game that used to always be on Thanksgiving, the day after or during that time. USC, UCLA. There are some you say, well, they'll never not play. And then again, we said that before. So that's that with Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. And there's always as well one of those two teams that probably wants that rivalry to continue because it would be beneficial if you beat them in Oklahoma, even if you don't do it very often, because when you do, it makes you feel even better, and you could use that in helping yourself with recruiting, even if it's 91-20 and whatever is overall in the series.
I do think it sucks for the state of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that really stinks that you're not going to play the game between the two biggest schools in your state. It's not like you're some massive state where you've got 6 or 7 schools like in Texas that all have some form of a rivalry over the years. I mean, this is Oklahoma State. That's it. And I mean, I don't know. I would seem to think that, that means something, even if one team wins it more often than not, but I guess not enough to continue it. But I think that's a loss for the state of Oklahoma. And I'm sure, Georgia coming in every, few years will, make Oklahoma fans forget about that, and Tennessee and, all these other schools, and they'll still play Texas and they'll get to play A&M again. But yeah, the traditionalist in me doesn't like that the state of Oklahoma itself is losing its 2 biggest schools, yearly dance, even if the Sooners did dominate that.
Our guest lineup today includes